This episode of The People of PCPS is brought to you through the generous support of Joe Fisher's office at Midstate Educators Insurance. For more information, visit insurepolk.com. Welcome to the People of PCPS, a Polk County Public Schools podcast. This podcast is dedicated to telling the stories of teachers, paraeducators, support staff, students, volunteers, alumni, and all the people who contribute to Polk County Public Schools. Whether they're working in the school district, learning in our classrooms, or using their education to improve our community, the people are what make Polk County Public Schools great. Let's get to know our colleagues, our students, our neighbors, and our friends, the people of PCPS.
Hi everyone, I'm Rachel Pleasant, the Senior Director of Communications for Polk County Public Schools, and welcome back to the People of PCPS podcast. Every day in the communications office, we meet new people, we talk to new people, but we don't often get the time to really talk to them and really learn about their stories and who they are and what they contribute to the organization. And so this podcast is dedicated just to getting to know the people of Polk County Public Schools better, because we believe it's the people that really make this organization great. And today we have a very special guest. We have Lois Horn-Diaz, the 2017 Polk County Public Schools Teacher of the Year. I got the year right. Correct, Lois? Okay. Yes. Lois has been working for Polk County Public Schools for 33 years, but she has been in public education for 35 years. She's been with Polk County Public Schools for the 33 years, and the first 23 or so years, she was a school psychologist. And about 10 years ago, she decided to become a teacher. And so we're going to learn more about her career and how her teaching practice has evolved, because Lois is now teaching virtually during the pandemic. So Lois, just to start out to think about our pre-pandemic lives, why did you want to become a school psychologist? And then why did you want to become a teacher?
Well, I've always wanted to be a teacher. From the time I was in third grade, and I got inspired by my third grade teacher, who was creative and exciting and just brought her lessons to life. So I had every intention of being a classroom teacher when I majored in elementary ed at the University of Central Florida. But when I graduated, I was offered a job at SeaWorld, Florida, as their education representative. So instead of teaching in a classroom, I taught in a stadium filled with 1,000 children. And that was the beginning of my education career. So that kind of evolved from there to an opportunity to do a local television show called This Is Me for preschool children. And that show was about emotional and social development in children. And that really lit a fire in me. So that's what prompted me to go back to graduate school and study school psychology. And that led me to my job first in Osceola County for a couple of years, and then in Polk County in 1988.
Okay. And then why the switch from being a school psychologist to being a teacher? Why, once you had gotten into that career for so long, why did you decide to change?
Well, I loved my work as a school psychologist, and I loved being a school psychologist in Polk County especially, because I had a lot of freedom to sort of bring my other interests and talents into my job. And so I got to perform for children and do programs about staying drug-free and bullying prevention and how to get along and understand their own emotions. And that, along with doing assessments, intellectual and academic assessment, gave me the opportunity to work closely with children. And I felt like I was teaching in a global sense. And that was a wonderful career for me for many years. Then through the years, the profession kind of evolved, moving more towards data analysis. And that's a great interest to many people, not so much to me. So when I saw the profession shifting, and I realized that, hey, that dream I had as a kid to be a classroom teacher maybe this is the time to shift into that and end my career the way I had always intended to begin it and never actually did. So after all those many years, I finally stepped into a classroom.
Came full circle. How do you think you as a teacher are different, or how is the experience for your students different because you have such a strong background as a school psychologist? What do you bring into the classroom?
Well, particularly because I chose to teach gifted children, I think that my experience as a school psychologist is very valuable, because through my years practicing school psychology, I more or less began to specialize in the needs of gifted children. And there are a lot of things about gifted children that people don't understand. Even teachers, even mental health professionals, even medical professionals just don't have a strong background in the specific needs of gifted children. So as I studied and gained more experience, there were a lot of things that I learned just by virtue of working with gifted children that I was testing over and over and over and over. I heard the same stories from parents, from teachers, from children. And I started to kind of link together, wait a minute, there's something to this. And that's what prompted me to go back to school for the fourth time to graduate school and get additional credentials in gifted education. So I feel like I was able to bring into my gifted classroom a real broad understanding of those children's needs. And one of the joys, besides working directly with the children, has been to work with the families. And I think that when parents know that someone understands their children and understands that being gifted doesn't just mean, oh, your kid's smart and does well in school. There's a whole lot of other things that come along with that. Special needs. It is a special need. So I feel very fortunate that I was able to bring that experience into my classroom, and it's been a blessing for me as well.
Well, that's really fascinating, and I actually had no idea that that was the case. I mean, of course, gifted by the nature of the term kind of gives you a sense for the kind of children that you're teaching. But for the layman, for people who have not invested years in studying it, can you give me like just one example or one type of quality you see to elaborate on what you just said about how these students? Yeah. Okay.
I'd be delighted.
Okay.
So, gifted children, particularly highly gifted children, have a very specific set of characteristics. And the reason most people don't understand this is because the frequency of running across a highly gifted child would be so rare that a classroom teacher maybe sees one highly gifted kid every 5 years. And if you don't see a pattern over and over, you don't kind of link it together and say, oh, I understand this. So what happens with highly gifted people is as the cognitive development gets so exaggerated, a lot of other things come along with it. And in the gifted education world, it's called overexcitabilities, and it's neurological. So your cognitive development is accelerated, but so are your emotions. So are your sensory inputs. So are your imagination and et cetera. So it's almost like those children have those sensory inputs turned up on high. A lot of gifted children will have difficulty with being bothered by sounds, being bothered by textures, being bothered, they don't like the tags in their shirts or the line on their socks. Or they'll say, Miss Beep Beep, that's their nickname for me. Miss Beep Beep, something smells in here because somebody used a flavored hand sanitizer, and they pick up on that, and it bothers them. Their emotions tend to be big, and they're very perfectionistic, and things can bother them to a nth degree. And it's not to say that those are reasons to just excuse those behaviors, but it's a reason to see these issues as something that children need help with. And unfortunately, a lot of times it's viewed in a punitive way. The other issue of gifted children that comes up a lot is that just because you are academically and intellectually gifted does not mean that the rest of your body has come along with that. So children will think like, they might be 7 years old, but they might think like a 12-year-old, but they might have the handwriting of a 5-year-old. Therefore, it becomes frustrating when they try to write down on paper these high-level thoughts that they have. Same thing with if a gifted child is watching the news with their parents, and the parents think, oh, this kid's only 6 years old, he doesn't understand. Well, the child is able to cognitively understand, but emotionally cannot tolerate or understand, and it creates a lot of problems for children with that kind of dynamic. So I could go on and on about this.
And what is it about, I mean, as you're talking, and this gets back to where we want to get to know the people of PCPS better, and as you're talking, it's clear this is your passion. What is it about this group of children that really captured you? Was there a moment?
Well, in a small way, I probably experienced some of this as a child myself. But then I had my son, and he definitely exhibited a lot of these characteristics. And what was surprising to me was, as a school psychologist trained in the 1980s, I never got any training, and as a teacher trained in the early 1980s, not a single word was spoken about any of this having to do with gifted kids. All we were exposed to was the idea that this was high intellectual development, and here's how you test a kid to determine it. But all of this was research that came out in the 80s, later in the 80s, in the 90s, and this was all additional understanding that came after my training. So the way I found out about all of this was I was doing some what is going on with my son research. And that's when I coupled that with my observation of the children I had tested through 20 years. And I had a big aha moment. And actually that's prompted me to choose this area of study for my dissertation. I'm in the process at Florida Southern of working on my doctorate. And I'm going to be doing my dissertation on this very issue of overexcitabilities.
So I would, just trying to put myself in your place as you're talking, do you have a sense that these are children who are capable of so much, and yet if they aren't understood correctly and if they aren't properly supported, that potential could be possibly not realized one day? Do you go to work with that knowledge every day? Is that what you're?
Absolutely, that is it. And parents, are so concerned about these issues. They've got this child that is unusual, and sometimes, sadly, they get a lot of negative feedback from the daycare, from the Sunday school class, sometimes from their public school classroom, and understandably so, because these behaviors make the child look different. They are different. But if they're understood and the child is helped to understand themselves, then it becomes something that the child can grow from and learn to be able to fit in to a certain extent, and to modify some of these things too, not to change or make it go away, but just to understand, okay, well, I have, my students know they have big feelings. I say, here come those big feelings again, but the child is not rejected. And the child understands themselves and says to themselves then, hey, I better just take a deep breath because here come those big feelings. So gifted children, perfectionism and intensity, those are the bottom, the foundation of these overexcitabilities, intensity and perfectionism. And any parent of a gifted child will say a big amen to that.
Yeah. So talk about I was very fortunate to be able to visit you at your school, our Bruce Wagner, at least a couple of times prior to the pandemic. But I don't know if I actually ever made it into your classroom. I don't recall. I remember coming to your Shakespearean production that you do every year. But so just for our listeners and for me, describe to me your pre-pandemic classroom and how you created an environment where these children could thrive.
Well, because and this is a blessing, I have the same children all the way through their elementary career. Some are identified in kindergarten, not all, usually, but by first and second grade. So they're with me first through fifth grade. So my classroom becomes a little bit of a second home to them. And I wanted it to be inviting and creative and exciting. And so on this new challenge to teach gifted, I thought, what would be a good way to visualize what I wanted to do with them? And I came up with the idea of a hot air balloon, that we would take a hot air balloon ride, imaginary ride, and then travel back in time and travel to other places. And one of our journeys in the classroom, I usually have 4 different journeys through the school year. The first one is always a journey within, where we understand ourselves, again, because that's such a need for gifted children. But the hot air balloon goes right along with that we're journeying within. So my classroom has a hot air balloon reading corner and rainbows. And it's, as a matter of fact, let me just show you, because when I see my kids now, my students from home, they're missing their home away from home. So I will pop in my classroom background so that we feel like we're back where they're used to be.
Oh, I see the hot air balloon there.
Yeah, that's the little individual hot air balloon, and then there's a big hot air balloon reading corner as well that my husband built for me 10 years ago. And so I miss my classroom, I have to say that. And I tell my students that, and they tell me that, and that's okay. You know, we can miss our classroom. But something I've also told them many times for the year is if plan A doesn't work out, you go to plan B. And so that's what we're doing. We're plan Bing.
So you, after many years of teaching in a traditional sense and being in a traditional setting, you are now teaching virtually. What has this been like? How have you had to change as a teacher? How have you seen your students change?
Yeah, well, I have 2 feelings about that. One is I wish I was back in the classroom with my students right in front of me, but that is not the reality of what we're dealing with right now. So I am determined to take a positive approach to this and make the best of things. In the spring, when we pivoted suddenly to distance learning, I had decided to do project learning with my students. And I had played around with a website called Voki, and they had an option called Voki Hangout. So I created that for my students, where we had a virtual classroom where we can interact with one another. And I would post a challenge of the week, and then they would read and research, and then they would respond to that by creating avatars that would then be their spoken report back to me. We had a lot of fun with that. Other than that, I did individual Zoom sessions with them. So I was talking to them just one at a time. And that was beautiful. That worked very well. And I had no struggles with that. And I would check in with them and how they were doing on their projects. And then toward the end of the year, we worked on our virtual Romeo and Juliet Shakespeare project, which was quite an undertaking, but we had a great time doing it, and it turned out better than I could have hoped.
Yeah.
So that experience was pretty exciting and went very well. That plan worked out perfectly for my students.
That's great.
Now, starting this school year, when I understood that we should be in a different kind of modality where I would meet with my students as a class during the time that we would have been meeting if we were in school. I have found that to be much more challenging. And now I understand why the teachers that were meeting in mass like that with the whole group last year struggled. Because I remember thinking, what's the big deal? Zoom is great. This worked out great for me. Well, now I know, because the challenge of gathering multiple children at the same time on Zoom, it's not easy. There's a big learning curve.
Yeah. So technology aside, I mean, what's been the biggest challenge as far as maybe it's with planning your lessons, or has it been hard to adjust to just not physically being around your kids every day, but just kind of the technical aspects of it aside, what's posed the biggest challenge? But also, have there been any unexpected benefits of this, or good, or upsides to it? Has anything good come from this transition?
Well, I'll start with what's good. And what's good is that we're having to learn new things. Mm-hmm. We're all creatures of habit. So unless, we're pushed to pick up something new, most people tend to kind of take their time about changes. So this has prompted all of us to have to take a risk and jump right in, even if you're not totally comfortable with something. Mm-hmm. But as far as how it's going with the children, what is going besides the technology, the challenge for me is not being able to see the reactions of my students in real time. Mm-hmm. When I see the little face in the little square, I don't have as many clues mm-hmm. on whether they get it, they understand it, are they paying attention, getting the feedback immediately. I'm learning new techniques. I'm doing a lot of the thumbs up, thumbs down, but there's so many nuances that being with a person allows you to get that through the screen is just not the same. The one-way communication, if I'm just talking to them, I think that's all right. Mm-hmm. But when I'm just trying to non-verbally get back, whether they have questions and their communication back to me isn't as strong as if I was in the room with them.
If you could go back to the pre-pandemic life and talk to Lois before all this happened, what would you tell yourself? What advice would you give yourself?
Well, I've thought about that a lot just in my whole life, all aspects of my life. And the lesson is treasure each day. And I guess the cliche would be, you don't know what you got till it's gone, right?
Right.
So just the carefree freedom to roam around campus and give my kids a hug and do whatever you feel like doing and going wherever you feel like going, that's a loss. And we're all dealing with that loss. And, we're all hoping that there'll be a day when it's all coming back. But, that's affecting me. But I have to remember that's affecting my students, too.
Well, I was going to ask you, as a school, do you find yourself maybe tapping into your school psychology background? Do you talk to your students about how they're feeling with all this and how they're dealing with, we're all grieving a life we'll never get back. We may get a form of it back, but it'll never be quite the same for many of us.
And I'm concerned, and I have been concerned in the spring as well. We talked, a lot of our lessons were about, I tried to think, how can I address this without scaring them more, So I tried to emphasize the fact that through history, things like this have happened and people have gotten through them. So 2 of our lessons in the spring had to do with other pandemics and people who did amazing things during the pandemic. So we studied the fact that a lot of Shakespeare's writings were done when he was quarantined during the plague. And we also studied the origin of the Candyland game, which was also invented by a woman who was quarantined during the polio epidemic. And that's when she created Candyland. And she created it for the children in the hospital during their hospitalization for polio to give them something fun to make the time go faster. So, she took something like that and look at this amazing thing she created out of that.
Do you think your kids, you've been with them for a while, the same group of children, you said you teach them their whole way through. So you have kids that you've had since kindergarten, correct? How have you seen them change during the course of this? What they've had to adapt? Do you think this will in some way have a lasting mark on them? And if so, how?
I really don't know. I don't know. If you look through history, people have gone through traumatic events. I think about, my parents' generation were teenagers during the Great Depression. They were young adults during World War II. Those were challenges beyond anything that I could have imagined, but they continued through life. And we also studied the flu epidemic of 1918 and how people's lives changed at that time, but yet by the 1920s, life was back to normal, and no one mentioned much about the flu epidemic. So I think people are resilient, and I keep telling my students, you're going to have quite a story to tell when you're older. That hey, I remember when.
Yeah.
I hope that they are talking about their feelings. And I certainly am there to talk with them if they want to, but also in their families. I've encouraged that as well.
You mentioned before we started recording that you're approaching the end of your career with the public school system, at least. This is a two-part question. When you think about your many years with Polk County Public Schools, what are you most proud of, period? But then also, what are you most proud of just from March to today, your pandemic response? What are you most proud of?
I think that my pandemic experience, I'm proud of the fact that even though I had gotten to a comfortable place in my teaching where my routine was set, my classroom was done, my curriculum was developed, and it's not that it was easy, but I was kind of like comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And the pandemic response required me to go back to, I can remember 10 years ago, I call it my startup cost.
Mm-hmm.
When my first year of teaching in the classroom, I think I counted 42 days in a row where I didn't take any days off, including Saturday and Sunday. So that was the cost of starting something new, because that's what you have to do. And even though now, at this late stage of the game, I'm like, I'm not working 7 days a week again, but yes, I did. And the reason I did is because it was something new and it required it. But my heart goes out to all the teachers that invested in their startup cost at whatever point in their career. And the whole group of them have had to do the same thing again. It's kind of like, I compare it to when you have a new baby, and when you have a new baby, everything gets put on hold and your total focus is there. And what we've done in Polk County Schools is we've just had a new baby.
Yeah. We, again, as we talk to our various interview subjects, we want to find out, we believe that everyone who's a part of this organization contributes something to it. And we want to discover what that is. And I want to ask you, Lois, as a veteran teacher, a former school psychologist who's, worked with many classes of students and will certainly have a lasting legacy at Polk County Public Schools. But what do you think you've contributed? What is your defining contribution to our organization?
Whoa. Well, I can tell you what made me feel like I contributed something significant. When I was honored as the 2017 Teacher of the Year, which was totally unexpected, I can tell you that.
Yeah.
I heard from so many parents, I'm going to get all choked up on this, and teachers that I had worked with as a school psychologist 20 years prior. Parents who said, you tested my child in, whatever year, 1998, and shared their remembrances of that time and their appreciation for whatever, I don't even know what I did, but the fact that those things would have been remembered all those many years later, and that those people were so kind as to share that with me, that is something that that will always stay with me.
Yeah. Anything else you would like to share with our viewers about the eSchool experience, or just your teaching practice? Anything I haven't, there's so much to ask you about, Lois, but is there something you would like our audience to know about you that I haven't asked?
No, I think I know everything. I talk too much. But what I would like to say about eSchool is that, this is I keep telling my students, we are all learning together.
Yeah.
And teachers need to just give themselves permission to not be perfect at this time. Mm-hmm. And parents permission, and children need to give themselves permission. If I was going to give any advice, though, to parents whose children are in eSchool, mm-hmm. it would be that I would ask them to try to find a quiet spot in the house mm-hmm. in which their children can work, because it is very difficult when you're trying to concentrate on what's coming through a screen and the teacher is not right there in front of you. When there's a lot of commotion, mm-hmm. I think that is making it tougher for the children. That would be my advice. And then my encouragement would be, whatever seems so insurmountable right now, in 3 months will seem just normal. And that's what I'm counting on. And I'll tell you, I've only been with my students now, this is my 3rd week, because I didn't get to start with them from day 1. But week 3 is so much better than week 1. We're getting into a routine. It's a whole new thing, and we're having to learn it. So I'm confident that as we continue on, we're going to get to a good place, and we're going to get a lot done.
Well, I mean, think of where we were in March. That was certainly a lot harder. So we've come a long way. You're right, and even just this school year. So, and I guess if students remember anything from this time, it's that things don't always go as planned, and you just adjust and do your best, and you may not be perfect. So, very, very wise words that you shared there. So. Okay, well, thank you so much. The 2017 Teacher of the Year, Miss Lois Horn-Diaz, a.k.a. Miss Beep Beep. Thank you so much for being our guest today. We really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you change careers to become a teacher, para, or bus driver? Do you remember the moment when you knew a career in education was right for you? Are you a PCPS alumnus who remembers the teacher who made you believe you were capable of great things? Are you a student who is already putting your K-12 education to work in our community? We all have a story to tell, and those stories are part of what makes PCPS great. Tell us yours. To be a guest or to nominate someone you know to be featured on The People of PCPS, fill out the form posted online at polkschoolsfl.com/podcast. Thanks for listening.
You can subscribe to the People of PCPS podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify, or watch online at the Polk County Public Schools YouTube channel. To learn more about the People of PCPS and other Polk County Public Schools podcasts, visit polkschoolsfl.com/podcasts.